Well, thank you very much for asking me to join the conference today. I've been listening to some of the discussions, and thank you, all of you, for what you're doing for animal welfare in this country. I am just one MP, but I happen to be passionate about animal welfare and have been ever since I was elected nearly 20 years ago. I used to be the Shadow Minister for Animal Welfare when David Cameron was Leader of the Opposition. I currently chair groups particularly dedicated to zoos and aquariums. So I'm working hard at the moment to try and save Britain's zoos following the crisis they're going through during this pandemic. So there are a lot of animal welfare issues going on in the country today, and there are lots of MPs that are engaged in those issues. But I particularly want to talk about a particular area that I selected to raise in Parliament and to promote a new piece of legislation. And that legislation is called the Dogs and Domestic Animals Accommodation and Protection Bill. Some of you may have seen my speech in Parliament on the 14th of October, in which I presented the first reading of the bill, which is a 10-minute rule bill. A 10-minute rule bill, for those of you who don't know, is a device for an MP to raise an item in Parliament, to propose it as legislation. Very rarely does it become law, but it does have the effect of raising a very important issue to government. It's often picked up by government and then incorporated into other legislation, or perhaps by the opposition who will then campaign for it. So although my bill itself is unlikely to become law, it nevertheless has made a major impact. In fact, I've had more publicity and more comments about this particular bill that I propose than any other in my 20 years as being an MP. So I do think that this is something worth promoting and worth discussing. Now, the bill essentially is called Jasmine's Law, after a dog who was prevented from living in a home. Someone who has rented accommodation was not allowed to have the dog in their home. And I found out that this is widespread. As many of you will know, it's a common problem where a pet is discarded, is prevented from living with their owner. The owner loves their animal, but the people that are renting the property to the person, or the council or the housing association, says there is no pets allowed. So there are blanket no pet rules in so many of our rented accommodation across the UK. And this leads to not only distress for the owner, but clearly distress for the animal, particularly dogs, who will feel this very hard when they're separated from an owner that they're used to and they love, but other animals as well. So this blanket rule of no pets has caused and is causing much heartache, including people just preferring to be homeless than to give up their animal, people deciding not to accept accommodation they're given and living in rough conditions, or even committing suicide rather than having to give up their animal. And there's a particular case of that we know about. So this is, I think, an outdated situation whereby landlords, unfortunately not all, but many of them, choose just to have a blanket rule on this. And the welfare implications of this are pretty vast, and the stress to the owners is also unacceptable. So there needs to be a change in attitudes. I think even more importantly than the law could be changed. The law should be amended to give preference to those who want to have their animal and want to keep their animal, provided it's well behaved, provided there is responsible ownership of that pet. But I do think that one of the spin-offs of this legislation that I proposed is that it has made a lot of landlords, I believe, think about the rules they're imposing. I've had avalanche of emails from people all over the country. Very hard to keep up with them all, to be honest. People who have suffered through having to give up their pet, or who are still grappling with this problem, but also with many landlords, some of which are angry. They're saying, well, what right have you got to tell us it's our property, and why should you be telling us that we should allow animals into our properties that could do damage and create harm and noise and mess? But others have contacted me and said, well, actually, you know, we do take a more reasonable position, or we will take a more reasonable position. and look at each case as an individual situation, because most animals will be well behaved. Most animals will not cause the problems that some landlords fear. There is going to be an occasion where one will, and of course my legislation that I put forward, my bill, accounts for that. There has to be certain animal welfare rules, and also a duty of responsibility by the owners to that animal, whichever creature it may be, but particularly dogs, so that the owner of the animal cannot just have carte blanche, but they have to show responsibility and respect for the owners of the property and their neighbours. And of course, if an animal is badly behaved and causing problems, then there can be exceptions. But generally speaking, the premise of this is that the weight should be shifted far more in favour of those that own the animal, so they can carry on with their lives. Losing an animal, I think, in many cases is like a bereavement. Many of you here will own animals, and you know what it's like when you lose a dog. It is like losing a member of the family. And when you think of the people that on a daily basis having to give up their animals, it's something we should change in this country as a supposedly nation of animal lovers. So this legislation is being supported by, I think, almost all of the major animal welfare organisations. I think we've had support from the Dogs Trust, the RSPCA, Battersea, etc., many others besides, and wide support across the House of Commons. It's been supported by MPs from, I think, 4 different parties. It's cross-party. It's been sponsored by a number of different MPs and has widespread support. So the next reading of the bill will be in January, but I do warn you, despite all that I've been saying, this is a 10-minute rule bill, and 10-minute rule bills often run out of time because you only actually officially get 10 minutes to present the first reading, but it can go to a second reading when you have another debate. But sadly, they rarely go beyond that because they're not government bills, and therefore they're not given the amount of time that's needed to pass all the different stages of a bill to make it legislation. But I'm hoping, and there are signs of this, that the government have taken note of my bill, and hopefully they will incorporate some of these ideas in future legislation, or in fact use powers ministers already have to perhaps change regulations. If you're interested in reading my speech, in fact, I've got the Hansard here. It's actually the Hansard of the 14th of October. So you can get that online. If you can't find it, please let me know. We can send you a link or a copy of the Hansard, but you can read in detail what I said in the House of Commons, which I hope will be of interest to many of you. So that is Jasmine's law. That is the bill that I proposed, and I'm very happy to answer questions on this or any other issue relating to animal welfare that's currently going on in Parliament. As I said earlier, I don't think zoos is your remit today, but there's a huge crisis going on in our zoos in Britain. I'm lobbying very hard for the government to take much stronger action to support the zoos and aquariums, safari parks, many of which are really now teetering, and this could lead to many animals being put to sleep, which is the last thing anyone would want to see, particularly Boris, who is an animal-loving Prime Minister, and I don't think we want to see our zoos closed down in this country. So we are many battles to fight, I think, at the moment, and particularly with the COVID situation which we are facing. It's making life much harder for so many people, and I think that MPs need to be aware of some of these issues and make sure that people's concerns and their voices are heard loud and clear in Parliament, and that's what I'm trying to do. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.